So I have a nickname. Uh, it's a nickname that my family knows me by. I am named after my grandpa. My grandpa's name was also John. And so my family needed a way or wanted a way to keep me separate from my grandpa. When they said John, they were afraid that both of us would answer or something. So they gave me a nickname. I have a nickname, and my family to this day knows me or calls me by this nickname. Uh, my grandfather passed away over 20 years ago now, and they still call me by this nickname. They don't have to keep us separate anymore. They could just call me John, but this nickname has become something that sticks. So especially my grandma will use it. Often she'll look at me and she'll say, Benji, which is the dog's name, and she'll call me that. Or she'll say all my cousins' names, or all her male neighbors' names, and she'll call me all these names, and then she'll finally remember who I am and settle down not on John, but on my nickname. And it's not just my grandma who knows me by this, but my entire family knows me as Little John, or to my grandma, Little Johnny. I'm 40 years old, and they still call me Little John. And I'm telling you about this because I would like for you to think about nicknames. Did you ever get a nickname growing up? Did you know somebody who had a nickname? Did you have a neighbor or a friend who went by a nickname, and this is how you still think of them to this day? I want to think with you for a second about nicknames, and I want you to think about that in order to move into or begin to consider what this week's gospel lesson in part seems to be about or be sharing with us. All right? So I'm asking you to think about nicknames, and I want to do that to segue into this week's gospel lesson, which is taken from the 8th chapter of Mark. It comes from the 8th chapter of Mark, and it begins with the 27th verse, and this reading runs all the way through the 38th verse. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" I'll interject here and I'll just say, what do people call me? What's my name? And they answered him, John the Baptist, which by the way is probably better than Little John, but okay. John the Baptist, the others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him with a name, or a nickname. "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man, another nickname, must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan," a name. Peter, by the way, is a bit of a nickname for what Peter's real name is, but that's the way we know him. "For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father." So to me, this is about the names. This is about the nicknames or the titles or the names that are being tossed around in these verses. And I asked you to think about your nicknames or what you're known as, and I told you a story about my nickname and what I'm known as in my family. And I want to point out the direction of this. We often live as people who feel like we need to live into our names, up to our names. So my name is John Corsi, and I feel like that I need to live up to the standard of my grandfather, or up to the standard of being a Corsi, or to make a name for yourself. But this story, this text about nicknames and different nicknames, seems to talk about the nicknames or the expectations that don't come just from our families, but from God who has created us. And these nicknames become, if you listen to the direction of this, like a thing we live down to. I told you that my grandma calls me Benji, the dog's name, or Little John. And it's like this is a reminder of who I am and where I came from. And it's not that it's a grand, uplifting nickname, but it's that it's something I live down into. And I remember the days of my life and God caring for me and holding me in God's hand throughout all of the days, even when I really was Little John, all the way till now. And I think of this text, and I ask you to think about this text ahead of Sunday's worship together as a naming, and how it isn't just a climb into some grand name, but how it's a living into or down towards some of the names that know us or capture us the best. This gospel reading for this Sunday is from the 8th chapter of Mark. It has to do with who we are and what direction we move in to find our true strength, which is in our weakness, which is where God claims us and God reminds us of who we are and how hopeful and gifted He is and we are of who we are and our lives. So ahead of Sunday, I just wanted to visit with you a few seconds, ask you to think about your names, and ask you to think about direction, and ask you to think not so much about living up to your names, but maybe about living into our names, if they're the dog's names, our nicknames, or our full regular names. May we be reminded and may we consider the humility and the gift that it is to bear these, and may we go forward knowing that we are filled with God's strength more than our own. So that's a preview of this upcoming Sunday's text, and I just wanted to share with you ahead of that a chance to hear it so that you may begin to think about how this fits you, and as we gather in worship to consider it further, think about who we are and who God makes us.